Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. US President Donald Trump defends sending more troops to LA, saying without them, the city would be burning to the ground. In Austria, the school gunman who killed at least 9 has been identified as a 21-year-old former pupil. 3 days of mourning will be observed nationwide. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is calling for Hamas to disarm. Today, we're talking with Ahmad Fattouh, Fatah's spokesperson from Ramallah. UNIFIL's future in southern Lebanon is uncertain. France backs the mission, while Israel pushes for its removal. A decision is expected by the end of August. Now, US President Donald Trump has ordered the deployment of about 700 Marines to Los Angeles to respond to immigration protests. 4,000 National Guard troops have been mobilized since the beginning of the protests. Last week, protesters took to the streets after immigration and customs enforcement officers raided areas with a large Latino population. Our correspondent Toni Waterman sent us the latest from Los Angeles.
Things are very quiet in LA this morning. We have some cleanup crews trying to get graffiti off buildings around this demonstration zone. But just a couple of hours ago, this was the scene of intense clashes between police and demonstrators, some of whom were throwing projectiles at law enforcement officials, including what appeared to be at one point fireworks. Police were able to push this crowd back, eventually breaking it up using rubber bullets, flashbangs, and tear gas. And they really whittled it down to this core group of demonstrators, many of whom were later arrested. But this area right here has really become the main concentrated area of demonstrations. This is a federal immigration building, and behind it is a federal detention center where some of those immigrants who were detained in last Friday's raid have been held. This building is now being protected by National Guard's troops. The president saying that he is now doubling their number to 4,000. He has also activated 700 Marines to come throughout Los Angeles, and they have now arrived in the city. And the president saying just on Tuesday that if he had not deployed the military, that in his words, Los Angeles would be burning to the ground. This is something that officials across the state strongly refute. They say they did not ask for these troops to be mobilized, and they say that the small, concentrated nature of these demonstrations does not warrant the presence of troops, and that instead of quelling these demonstrations, that the military could actually invoke more violence. And California is now suing the Trump administration over the deployment of these troops against its wishes. Los Angeles is really been at the fore of Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration. It is the second largest city in the United States. More than a third of the people that live here were not born in the U.S. They are immigrants, so they have felt very vulnerable to this crackdown on immigration policy, which of course has included a shutting down of the borders of the asylum system, a crackdown on international students, this travel ban, and the raids that we are seeing not just here in Los Angeles, but across the United States now for months. But these demonstrations against those policies are spreading not just across California, but to other locations as well, including Dallas, Boston, Atlanta, New York City. And this is all under the prospect that what is happening here with this military presence could also be spreading to those cities as well. Toni Waterman, Al Arabiya News, Los Angeles.
Now, in a letter addressed to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the French President Emmanuel Macron, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has stated that Hamas must surrender its weapons and allow the deployment of Arab and international forces in Gaza. These statements come a week ahead of a Saudi-French conference focused on a two-state solution. For more, we are joined by Ahmad Fattouh, Fatah's spokesperson. An absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Abbas is calling for international forces to replace Hamas forces in Gaza. What has prompted this move and why now?
Thank you for having me. First and foremost, the Palestinian Authority is the legitimate authority of the Palestinian people, and they should return to the Gaza Strip because they are the legal authority and practice their legal jurisdiction over Gaza and the West Bank. Of course, when we talk about a Palestinian state or a project for a Palestinian state, it should be within one government, one weapon, and one authority, one Palestinian national project. The Palestinian people also requires international protection. We are all witnessing the crimes against humanity that Israel is doing in Gaza, the attacks in the West Bank, the settlements. All these attacks on the Palestinian mere existence require from the international community to pay attention and to save the Palestinian people from the cruelty and brutality of the Israeli occupation. Therefore, we don't have an army, we are defenseless, we don't have an air force, but we have the international community, we have the international law, we have the international resolution, more than 800 resolutions issued for the question of Palestine. Not one of them has been applied. We ask the question why. Therefore, it requires from the international community to take serious steps to preserve peace, to evoke peace, and evoke the two-state solution, provide an international protection mechanism for the Palestinian people under the understanding that we have reached with the international community. That requires a serious will and a serious policy by the international community and on top of them, the United States, to go forward into a peaceful path. And that peaceful path must be based and can only be based on the two-state solution.
In his letter to the Saudi Crown Prince and the French President, Abbas outlined the main steps he thinks must be taken to end the war in Gaza and what you're saying, achieve peace in the Middle East. Are his suggestions realistic and achievable? Is it actually possible that Hamas will release the hostages as requested?
Of course it's possible. Everything is possible if we have the will to go into peaceful negotiations and drop weapons. Israel cannot continue the process of bombardment, indiscriminate bombardment and disproportionate killing of the Palestinian people and starving 2 million human beings. That is a catastrophe. Let's go for negotiations and peaceful negotiations. We have seen that 2 weeks of negotiations in January have released more than 100 hostages. Therefore, the peaceful approach is actually the only approach, is the fruitful approach. Israel need to wake up from their cruel mind and their vengeance mentality. This is absolutely abhorrent, these ideas coming from Ben Gvir and Smotrich to exterminate the Palestinian people. We should go for a peaceful approach, and Hamas has to step down from power and go with the Arab reconstruction and peace plan, where we have said, and which is approved, by the way, by the Arab League, by the EU, and the OIC, the Islamic Organization Cooperation. Therefore, we go with that plan that states for a ceasefire first and foremost, the release of all hostages in both sides, and to go for a Palestinian Authority committee to run Gaza until we go for election, and also to reconstruct Gaza and make funds, international funds to the reconstruction. Then to go straight forward into the two-state solution, because we have to admit the inevitable. This is not an issue between Israel and Hamas. This is an issue between the occupation and the occupied. This is affecting the entire Palestinian people, not only Hamas and their groups.
But Ahmad,
therefore, Israel needs to admit and recognize Palestinian rights to exist.
So I just wanted to ask you a question. Yes. We're talking there about a resolution and what needs to be done. Are you in contact with Hamas? Is Hamas prepared to release the hostages? Is Hamas prepared to leave Gaza? Because Israel says they will continue their offensive until this is happening. What are we hearing from Hamas?
Well, the Hamas leader recently, Al-Hayy, announced that they want to step down of power. I hope they are serious, and I think they are serious in this gesture. It requires more, of course, understanding between Fatah and Hamas. Egypt is involved as a mediator, and to increase these talks, these national talks, to come into realization that the Hamas control over Gaza is only giving a pretext to the Israeli occupation to continue its war and to continue its genocide. Hamas cannot continue in this endless loop. They have to admit the fact that they failed in their coup against the government in Palestine since 2007. They entered Gaza into 5 wars. And now the genocide that took place after October 7, for their unstrategic thinking, now to go out from this trap of death that Israel has planted, is to to give up their power and call for the Palestinian Authority, the legitimate Palestinian Authority, to come back to Gaza, and therefore remove all pretexts in front of Netanyahu's table, because he wants an endless war, as you are full aware, for his issues, internal issues, and to continue in power. We have to be smart here, and Hamas need to think clearly, because each day passing, more of our children and women are dying. Of course, Israel is the first responsible of these deaths, but Hamas also can put their hands with the Palestinian Liberation Organization and give the negotiations to the PLO. They are the legitimate entity, and they have the experience and the legitimacy to do and manage these negotiations in the best way possible. Not to make it as a negotiation between Israel and a party, no, but between Israel and Palestine.
Ahmad Fattouh, Fatah's spokesperson, it was great to have your insights. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Now, Israel has deported Greta Thunberg, the campaigner, this morning, a day after intercepting the Gaza-bound aid boat she was on with 11 others. The Israeli Foreign Ministry stated Thunberg left Tel Aviv and has arrived in France after agreeing to deportation. Now, in contrast, 5 of the 6 French citizens with her refused to sign their deportation orders and will face legal proceedings, according to Israeli authorities. For more on this, I'm joined by Shuki Friedman, Director General of the JPP Jewish People Policy Institute. Absolutely great to have you on the show, Shuki. Thank you so much for joining us. Just before we get into the Greta Thunberg story, there are some figures coming out today by officials in Gaza. They say 36 people were killed today near aid distribution centers. Obviously, we cannot verify these figures because no international journalists are allowed into the Gaza Strip. Overall, they say around 200 people have been injured. Is Israel using aid centers as death traps for starving civilians in Gaza, as some people are suggesting?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I think it's the opposite. What happened today, I really don't know, because there is no reliable information. And based on the previous event, about 2 weeks ago, where Hamas reported 25 or 30 being killed, and being figured out that no one had been killed. So let's assume that it's another lie of Hamas. But the more important thing is that what happened in Gaza today is Hamas took in hostages 55 Israelis are still there, 20 are alive, but also 2 million citizens of Gaza, which he's using as hostages to remain in power. And what we see in these distribution centers is that Israel is trying, through cooperation with international company or income company, to feed the population, support them, and make them more, at least, not starving, and get some necessity and food. And Hamas is preventing them to get there, and even shooting them through their way to the distribution centers. So if someone put traps in these centers, it's Hamas, not Israel.
Thank you for clarifying that. And as I do know, the figures are extremely difficult and hard to be accurate because no independent journalists are allowed into Gaza under the rules of Israel. But let's talk about Greta Thunberg. She's arrived in France following her deportation. She says Israel did commit an illegal act by kidnapping them on international waters and against our will. Do you agree with her personal account of what happened?
I think this event is quite marginal because it's a way of demonstrating against the situation in Gaza. It's legitimate to demonstrate, legitimate to blockade the water of Gaza, and Israel is doing it for 2 decades, and actually preventing this flotilla to get into Gaza. But I think what's more important is how to end this catastrophe in Gaza, and it's really heartbreaking to see the suffer of the population over there. And I think Israeli side is really willing to end this war by releasing the hostages and also de-weaponize Hamas. And if Hamas is only agree to these 2 conditions and step down and let international power to take over, Gaza will thrive. Gaza will be restructured and renovate, and I think the future of the Gazans will be much more better. So if Greta Thunberg and her friends care about the Gazans, they should address Hamas and demand Hamas to simply let the Gazan live and leave them alone by not treating them with guns and bringing foreign powers to take over and to bring more prosperity and better future for all Gazans and Israelis.
Shuki, I just want to move on to another story. Yesterday, Netanyahu was in court again, being cross-examined in his corruption trial for the 3rd time. A protester called him a loser. Could this trial tear down the Prime Minister?
This trial is going for more than 3 years. It's, I think, will take more than a year to conclude. There are so many witnesses down the road, and maybe possibility of appealing. I think the more near catastrophe or threat on Netanyahu government is the crisis regarding the drafting of the ultra-Orthodox to the army. And if we look into the political situation, we see that even though the government is quite stable, the ultra-Orthodox is threatening in collapsing the government, and this might bring the end of this current Netanyahu government. The court will take longer than this crisis, I think.
And Shuki, just before I let you go, briefly, Britain and other allies have sanctioned Israeli far-right ministers over their repeated incitements of violence against Palestinian communities. Is this a major step from Israeli allies against Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the government, really?
Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are extreme right-wing ministers in the Israeli government. They've been elected legitimately by the Israeli people. I personally don't support their policies and don't support their declarations, but I think that through a time of war, it's better that like-minded states or close friends of Israel will prevent of these steps of sanctioning Israeli ministers and sanctioning this government, and to try to negotiate and have a conversation with the government to eliminate these kind of policies and eliminate threat toward the Palestinians in the West Bank. Because I think in Israeli perspective and interest, there is both 2 interests. One is to not lose its friends around the world, and more important, the closest friends like Canada and the UK, but also to keep the West Bank calmed down and more frequent and contained. So I think the better path for both sides is not sanctioning this minister, but trying to negotiate and have a conversation between friends to mitigate tensions and to contain violence from both sides.
Shuki Friedman, Director General of the JPP, Jewish People Policy Institute. It was great to have your thoughts on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. 10 people are dead after a shooting at a secondary school in the Austrian city of Graz. Students, at least one adult, and the suspected gunman are among the dead. Several others are injured, with up to 30 people in need of medical assistance. It's reported that the alleged shooter is a 21-year-old former student. Austria's Chancellor, Christian Stocker, says this is an international tragedy. Here is what he had to say.
Today is a dark day in the history of our country. The shooting rampage at a school here in Graz is a national tragedy that has shaken us to the core. 9 people were suddenly torn from their lives by this incomprehensible act. There are no words to express the pain and grief felt throughout Austria.
Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the US is diverting 20,000 missiles promised to Kyiv to the Middle East. Speaking with ABC News, Zelensky says the weapons were part of an agreement with the Biden administration. The reallocation comes as Russia launches the biggest drone assault on Ukraine, and that happened yesterday. And the world fertility rate is on the decline. A report by United Nations Population Fund said the fall is due to the high cost of living, inability to find a suitable partner, and a lack of time to raise children. 14 countries were surveyed about their fertility intentions. Last year, South Korea, which has the lowest birth rate in the world, introduced policies to incentivize Koreans to become parents. Now, with the United Nations interim force in Lebanon's future in south of the country uncertain, peacekeepers are reporting attacks by rock throwers during a patrol, calling it unacceptable. Israeli media says the US and Israel want UNIFIL's mission to end. However, the UN Security Council will vote on its renewal by late August. I'm now joined from Paris by international affairs journalist Harold Hyman. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Harold. Prime Minister Nawaf Salam has condemned the repeated attacks on UNIFIL peacekeepers and is actually now calling for action. Who is committing these attacks, and what does it mean for the security in southern Lebanon?
Who is committing the attacks? I wouldn't know any better than the latest dispatches, but the suspicions are generally directed towards partisans of Hezbollah. Don't know if it's the case in this instance. And the UN has not been able to fully accomplish its missions for the longest time, for decades. And they barely can move without being followed by the Hezbollah, and they don't normally push very hard. This is before the Gaza war, but they don't push very hard to get at the weapons caches because they would suffer fire and intimidation. So this seems to be in the same vein, but the game has changed, and Hezbollah is not as powerful, not nearly as powerful as it was a year ago.
So that brings me to my next question, because you said, you know, the UN haven't pushed back so hard, these peacekeepers, to get hold of the weapons caches. But how effective has these peacekeeping efforts actually been? Because as you describe, that we are still seeing Hezbollah presence in the south of Lebanon, and some argue that this was able to happen under their watch.
Well, that's it. They're watching. They can't really intervene. This is the drama of the UN peacekeeping forces in all theaters. they don't have clear mandates. And when they do, they perform beautifully. But if they don't, they can't really move. And they don't have equivalent weaponry to Hezbollah. They're not really supposed to be a force that engages. They have to have a political aspect. And the political aspect is going up to Hezbollah and saying, please remove your weapons. And they come back and they're still there. And what are they supposed to do? They could engage in a war, but they're not supposed to. They're not expected to. So in a sense, militarily, this is ineffective. But this was never really supposed to be a hardcore military operation of the UN. We're not in, Congo in 1965. What is happening now is that the Lebanese armed forces, the official forces, are beginning to have some success in disarming Hezbollah, and in part because the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli army have done so much harm to Hezbollah. So this is combined something that they can now participate in. The blue helmets can now come with the Lebanese armed forces, and actually back them up. So it's delicate, but it's beginning to have some effect. And let's not forget that the Israeli strikes are undoubtedly tied to this process, even though the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun is continuously condemning the Israeli strikes, and so is the Quai d'Orsay, the French Foreign Ministry. But that doesn't mean that the Israeli strikes are ineffective. They are effective, and this allows the Lebanese armed forces to do something, and therefore the Blue Helmets can then enter the stage.
Harold, you said that this is a delicate situation. France is working extremely hard to extend UNIFIL's mission in southern Lebanon, but the US and Israel have an opposing view. What actions can we actually expect from Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu? Do you think they'll say these UN peacekeepers are just not needed anymore?
They very well might. Now, Israel has no weight in the UN on this question. And the U.S. has complete and total weight. But the behind-the-scenes feeling is that all the allies of the United States, well, most of them, France, UK, Canada, Germany, Italy, they're all pushing for the United States not to destroy the international system that was based on the various UN resolutions, even though they're interpreted extremely differently, and the presence of the UN. Because the dogma in France is, the doxa, shall we say, is that Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, all these are international issues that were UN-based, that were to be handled by the UN from day one. The U.S. is trying to eliminate that affiliation. The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, is doing everything he can to scuttle that tradition. And so the United States would like to get rid of it. The Israel governments, and certainly the Netanyahu government, do not like the UN for various reasons. And so if they could get rid of it, they would, but they're going to have to pay a price because all their allies are there saying, no, don't do it. And then there are other peacekeeping missions throughout the world, and they would take a toll. So there is great pressure on Washington not to do it. So either Donald Trump defies everybody, which he is wont to do, or they somehow find some sort of in-between agreement, and they have till August to figure this out.
Harold Hyman, international affairs journalist. Absolutely fascinating having your insights. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now let's look at the latest developments involving the world's two largest economies, China and the United States. A second day of talks has been held in London, and investors are hopeful for an improvement in relations. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says the trade talks with China were progressing well. Let's speak to Nader Rong Huan, a writer and political analyst, for more on this. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show. OK, so Wall Street's main indexes are pretty mixed today as investors await the outcome of these ongoing trade talks between the US and China. How are the negotiations actually progressing?
Thank you very much for having me. China-US trade talks in London is sending a positive signal to the global economy, and it has received positive market reception. This round of trade talks in London is to implement the consensus reached by the Chinese president and the US president in their phone talk a few days ago. It is a direct outcome of the Geneva discussions in May when both sides agreed to establish a consultation mechanism to continue negotiations. As Chinese president stressed in his phone call, dialogue and cooperation are the only correct choice for the two countries. I think the London talks is a good use of the economic and trade consultation mechanism, and the two countries can make efforts to seek win-win results in the spirit of equality and respect for each other's concerns. A lot of topics and issues will be confirmed, I think, in this round of talk in London, like fentanyl problems and technological sections, and also the rare earth products. I think from the China's side, concerns over U.S. technological sections were likely raised during the talk, and China wants to see some of these restrictions lifted, and China also expected these communication channels between the two countries to be expanded and normalized to reduce misunderstandings and rebuild mutual trust. In nature, China and U.S. economy and trade cooperation benefits not only the two sides, but also the other countries in the world, and match the expectations of the international community.
Nader, can I just intervene there and actually just just get to one question? Since Donald Trump's first term in office, the US-China trade deficit has been high on the agenda. What is China's answer to narrowing this huge trade deficit with America? Or is Trump's tariffs the only solution? You've spoken to me about the relationship that these talks can provide, but what's the solution?
As I said, China has made a lot of efforts to reduce the bad effects caused by the trade war, and to develop trade cooperation with other countries. And also China now also has a lot of other measures to against the trade of tariff wars that the U.S. launched against China, and also, but for this time, and at this time, China's position remains principled and pragmatic. But China also is also willing to ensure the stability of the supply chain of rare earth products, and as the Chinese government always emphasized that there is no winner in the trade war or tariff war, and I think the ball are now on the U.S. side, and I think the action will define the future.
And like you say there, China wants to de-escalate this trade war because we know that it bruised global markets when it did happen. Imports and exports rely on a good trade relationship between the US and China on a global scale. If a resolution is not reached and the trade war escalates, what ramifications will this have globally?
On the Chinese side, China don't want to see this happen in future, and China has made its best efforts to avoid happening this and make efforts to get agreement, reach agreement with the US side. But if the agreement cannot be reached, and also China will stand and will develop the relationship or the trade relationship with other countries, like countries in ASEAN and Brazil and other developing countries, and to defend the free trade.
Nader Rong Huan, a writer and political analyst, thank you so much for bringing me your thoughts on those US-China talks about trade happening over in London. Appreciate it. Let's take a look at the top business news now. US small business confidence improved in May. This is likely due to the de-escalation in trade tensions between Washington and China as talks do continue in London. However, uncertainty over the economic outlook, which is mounting amid worries over the fate of President Trump's tax cut agenda. And a Labubu human-sized figure has sold for over $150,000 at an auction in Beijing. This sets a new record for the toy as it moves from a craze to a collectible. Labubu was created a decade ago by a Hong Kong artist and illustrator, but the character's popularity skyrocketed in recent months. Let's go to all the sports news now. An Algerian defender, Rayyan Atik-Nouri, has joined Manchester City from Wolverhampton Wanderers on a 5-year deal. The 24-year-old had 1 year left on his Wolves contract. British media are reporting City paid around £33.7 million for the player. And Oscar Pistorius has competed in his first race in 12 years after murdering his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp. The South African Olympic and Paralympic runner took part in an Ironman triathlon in Durban over the weekend. Pistorius, formerly known as the Blade Runner, took a third place medal in the physical category, coming in 550th overall. And a reminder of our top stories. US President Donald Trump defends sending more troops to LA, saying without them, the city would be burning to the ground. In Austria, the school gunman who killed at least 9 has been identified as a 21-year-old former pupil. 3 days of mourning will be now observed nationwide. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is calling for Hamas to disarm. We did speak to Ahmad Fattouh, Fatah's spokesperson, a little bit earlier on in the show. UNIFIL's future in southern Lebanon is uncertain. France backs the mission while Israel pushes for its removal. A decision is expected by the end of August. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusifora is coming up next. Plus, of course, we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.